Good evening. This is Maestro with the Dawn of War 2 Retribution Elite Modcast. Today, we have a 1v1 Best-of-3 series, and our first player is going to be Rostam, playing as Sindri, Trollface, Chaos Sorcerer. This is a spellcasting and battlefield manipulation hero, and his opponent is going to be Lomors. Lomors is going to be playing as the Tech Marine. Tech Marine is a Space Marine ranged hero with a gun for every occasion and the ability to repair vehicles. So then, this is a replay submission, the first of several, as until the July round of Faction Wars come out, I am going to be just focusing on trying to get some replay submissions done, since these days I'm actually getting plenty of replay submissions, and with the priority on Faction Wars, the truth is I haven't been getting around to many of them, so I'm going to just commit myself to getting at least a few of them in. And, of course, I did say this is a 1v1, but it's a 1v1 series. It's not part of any tournament. It's just that these two players decided to actually play this as a best-of-3 series rather than just, a single game. And our matchup right here, the Sorcerer versus the Tech Marine. Now, for those of you who don't know, I'm not very active as a player at the moment, but many years ago when I was active as a player, my signature hero was the Sorcerer. It's my favorite hero in the game, and it's also a hero that, especially these days, now that I'm older and I can say things, just really be very honest about things, the Sorcerer has always been a very tricky hero to balance, where many of his abilities are kind of cheesy, and they often very much toe the line between being overpowered and being useless, which sounds kind of strange, but it's basically some of his abilities are literally just so cheesy that if they're balanced to be a little too good, then they'll be overpowered. And if they're toned down a bit, even just toning them down a little bit can actually make them underpowered. So it's kind of a strange thing where sometimes the Sorcerer is thought of as bad, other times he's thought of as way too good. And both are kind of true all at once, depending on the situation. And we do see that Lomors is starting off with a pretty big advantage in map control, 500 victory points to 413. Now, I think part of that is Lomors, with his opening, he went for a very map control-oriented opening, and obviously he got that. He wasn't looking for fights. He was splitting off his scouts, which makes sense, and it's a big part of just how you use scouts for Space Marines in 1v1. You usually want a double scout build, and a big part of the intention behind it is map control. As the game goes on, to help them scale, they have a lot of utility, but especially early on in the game, a big part of their role is just map control. Now, Rostam went for the double heretics. Although we might think, oh, 2 scouts, 2 ticks, is that for map control too? In a way, it can be, but a big part of doing this is also trying to go for the double heretic worship, since heretics, when they worship for the Sorcerer, will infiltrate nearby units. If you have 2 heretic squads worshiping in the same area, they'll even infiltrate each other, because one heretic squad by itself, although it infiltrates other units, will still be visible and can still be shot at by your opponent. So by using 2 of them, you can actually infiltrate both of them. Problem with that is that you're committing to a very static formation, and you need those 2 heretic squads together for that to actually work, and sometimes that cuts into your map control. And I feel that's even something that, very unfortunately for Rostam, kind of started him off with a pretty big deficit in map control, as he is going to find himself already down 140 victory points. And we haven't even seen that much fighting happen. And a big part of that is because Lomors, despite having a smaller army at this time, Rostam might start making up the victory points soon, but Lomors played more of that map control game, which you really have to focus on more in 1v1 than you have to do in team games. Sometimes 1v1 games are less brawly as a result, which is why they don't always make for as good of a spectacle. But that's also just kind of what the win condition is. The win condition in 1v1 games is slightly different because of that. I don't really like Lomors there not retreating the Tactical Marines earlier. He did lose a model by letting the Heretics get into melee. He could have just retreated them a little bit earlier, because, they would just be retreating back to base, which is where he is anyway, and I think there would have been a way that he could have saved one of those models. So these Heretics from Rostam actually exerting a lot of pressure. Tech Marine is behind, flanking the Havocs, but they will also get into melee with the Heretics. Heretics just use Doom Blast here. Don't even let the Tech Marine get into melee like that. I was a little disappointed there because eventually he has to retreat the Havocs. There's a decent chance he might have actually had to retreat the Havocs anyway, given that we see the Scouts, the Devastator setting up. Ooh, Heretics in a lot of trouble. Heretics need to get out before the Scouts actually have enough energy to attempt to nade them on retreat, but the Scouts will move a bit back. So we are seeing the Sorcerer get an upgrade. There are definitely many different upgrade paths that the Sorcerer has. This is definitely a very, very old school one. The Vestments of the Warp paired with the Sword of Flame. You basically turn the Sorcerer into a jump unit. He has about as much mobility as the Warp Spider Exarch or the Mech Boy. I compared the stats for the cooldown times as well as the energy use of the teleports, and it's about comparable to those other commanders. Of course, big difference being that the Sorcerer has to upgrade to get this, whereas those two commanders get it for free. That also does mean that the Sorcerer, so the resource investment is not to be diminished there. But it turns him into a jump unit. The Sword of Flame makes it so that he actually does enough damage to make this a lot more threatening. Without the Sword of Flame, he doesn't really threaten too much in terms of model kills. Ooh, grenade attempt. Is it going to be... Oh my god. What beautiful timing on that grenade out of Lomors. I mean, it's hard enough to throw grenades on retreat. Certainly these players, Lomors, very experienced, probably has a good sense of it. But it's hard enough just trying to get that on squads. But getting it on a commander, a single entity. And it actually, the timing was pretty much perfect. So very well done by Lomors. And of course, this being a 1v1... those commander deaths matter a lot, no matter where the kill is on the map. It could be right in front of your base, but in 1v1, you don't have teammates to revive you, so no matter what, it has to be a buyback, and we already see the buyback out of Rostam. I think the lucky thing for him is that he was doing well enough economically that the buyback for Rostam doesn't actually hurt him that much. Teleport in here. Devastator is pretty low on models. There's a decent chance that they lose the model there. There's the model kill. Yeah, the buyback doesn't hurt him too much. He was slightly ahead of Lomors economically. Now he's slightly behind. But as we see, it's not a huge difference between these two. They're both relatively on pace. In fact, they're very even in terms of their tech and their economy. It's mostly just the victory points that are massively in Lomors' favor. Now, of course, as things happen, it's hard to get around to all of my thoughts, but often one of the questions that gets thrown around is like, who does this matchup favor? And even though the Sorcerer was my signature hero, and I definitely know quite a bit about him, nice dodge there by Rostam. This game has just been around for so long. There have been so many changes, especially a lot of changes that I have not kept track of because of the fact that, you know, I was absent for a while, and the Elite Mod is an ongoing balance project. So I don't know definitively who this matchup really favors. And instead of just telling you very broadly and generally who I think the matchup favors, I like to focus a lot more just on the specifics, the concrete details of what the heroes are good at, what they struggle with, and how well they do against each other in very, very specific terms. And recently, Red Rupee has been streaming, and he's actually been saying very recently, and just as it turns out, Red Rupee is a Tech Marine main. He is known for his Tech Marine. He's been saying that he's been struggling with the Sorcerer. So, since I come more from the Sorcerer side of things, I know more about what the Sorcerer struggles with this matchup. Again, that's not to say that I believe the matchup favors the Tech Marine, but I know more about what the Sorcerer struggles with. The Sorcerer sometimes struggles a little bit with the shootier opening of the Tech Marine, since the Tech Marine has the rare combination of both being a ranged hero as well as belonging to an army that is primarily ranged in Tier 1, with both the starting units being ranged. So there's a lot of outgoing range damage coming from a Tech Marine player in the early game. And it will almost always be superior to the outgoing range damage of the Sorcerer in Tier 1, who is a melee unit to start out. Man, Demon Summoning Global. Summoning Circle Global, nearly wiping that Devastator, getting very, very close. Oh, might actually take down the Tech Marine. That would be such a crazy use of the Summoning Circle. Okay, doesn't get it. It was close, although this is still buying Rostam a lot because he's about to get a full cap on his opponent's power farm. Bloodletter's also coming out. Oh, that was a close one. So generally the Sorcerer, certainly in certainly in the early game, should be losing most head-to-head ranged fights. He generally, Heretic squads, it can be a lot more difficult to actually... Oh, Tech Marine gets out of there with 1 hit point. It can be a lot more difficult to actually really get Heretic squads into melee, because they will often just be burned down by the large amount of range damage coming out of the Tech Marine's army. Tech Marine also does have a lot of options to shut down melee units. We even see one of those there in the form of that Mastercrafted Bolter. So no shotgun scouts. And I do think, although shotgun scouts can certainly be very useful and highly effective against heretics, but I do think that Chaos, especially compared to a race like Eldar, is one of the races where Space Marines can get away with not building or not upgrading to shotgun scouts too early on. Heretics are a lot easier to kite away from than, say, Howling Banshees, and often the punishment that you suffer for when heretics actually do get into melee, usually not as bad as when Howling Banshees do, because they don't quite have the retreat killing potential, certainly not the speed to keep up the pursuit the way Banshees do, even though they certainly do plenty of damage. So obviously that superior range damage is one of the things that the Sorcerer can struggle with against the Tech Marine. One of the obvious things that the Tech Marine can struggle with against the Sorcerer is the way the Sorcerer can just kind of nuke down squads with Doom Bolts. That was a use of Doom Bolts. It actually wasn't a great one. Scout's not actually the greatest squad to use Doom Bolts against. Actually better to use it against Tactical Marines, since Doom Bolts does do plasma damage. The damage will scale up. And even a squad like Tactical Marines, Doom Bolts is definitely one of the big things about the Sorcerer that is definitely frustrating for some people to deal with, because Doom Bolts they're made in such a way that they can nuke down just most Tier 1 squads, probably even some Tier 2 squads. Doing plasma damage, just the way the damage type has been chosen and the way the numbers are balanced, Doom Bolts are very effective against really just most squads, except for maybe like late Tier 3 infantry squads. So you can nuke down Tactical Marines pretty easily. Even against a Tactical Marine squad, a nice cast of Doom Bolts can take down like 60-ish% of their health, maybe more. Now, the thing about Doom Bolts, though, is that Doom Bolts do have a bit of cast time, a bit of travel time. Heretic Squad going to be wiped, kept in there a little bit too long. So Doom Bolts are very dodgeable, and when you're playing against better players, you can reasonably assume that they will at least attempt to dodge them, react, anticipate. So generally, one of the next steps there for the Sorcerer player is to use Suppression as a way of comboing into Doom Bolts. Suppression primarily from the Havoc, but you can also do it with Raptors and Heretics as well. Although the style of play we're mostly seeing out of Rostam is a little bit more focused on that sort of flame. So he's doing kind of, I would say, fewer Doom Bolt casts that you might see. Certainly more fewer Doom Bolt casts than you would see out of a Sorcerer player who did not commit to this build. Since all of these things require energy, if you're going to be shooting off lots of Doom Bolts, you're going to be playing the Sorcerer a lot further back. And here, he's looking for a much more aggressive Sorcerer play, getting in there. Part of the advantage of this is that aside from doing damage, he can also tie up range squads, particularly important for tying up these Devastator Marines out on the field. Now, we've got a Dreadnought out on the field. And sometimes vehicles can also be something that not only the Sorcerer, but Chaos in general can struggle with a little bit, since their army is a little bit less well-tailored to transitioning into AV in Tier 2. But as we can see, a big part of what Rostam has actually done was just... He did not spend too much time in Tier 2. He got the Bloodletters. That was his only Tier 2 unit purchase, and he was able to tech fast enough to get to Tier 3. Grenade gonna go in. Unfortunately, Rostam not paying attention to this one, and his Khorne Chaos Space Marines will be hit. This is a big problem. All right, he won't lose the squad. He'll teleport them out of there. I don't think he lost even... Wow. He actually... I don't think he would have lost the squad there, but I think there was my estimation, which we can't prove right or wrong anyway because the Warp Global was used, but I think Rostam was going to lose 2 models there if he did not use the Warp Global. So that's kind of a question there, if the Warp Global is really worth it. He saves the requisition and the power from the reinforcement cost, but ends up paying the red that he needed to use the Warp Global to get them out of there. Of course, that Warp Global, yet another one of the things from the Sorcerer that is often seen as kind of cheesy, unfair, and frustrating, which is that you can... you can use it in many ways. In that case, it was just used as a get-out-of-jail-free card. Rostam messed up there. He didn't micro the... He didn't micro the Khorne Chaos Space Marines away from the grenade. He just wasn't paying attention to it, just had his eyes elsewhere on the map. And then the Dreadnought was in retreat. So, and he did not have time to... He kind of committed them to the retreat before realizing that the Dreadnought was in the retreat path. So he just used the Warp Global just as a get-out-of-jail-free card. I think that last cannon actually scored a direct hit on the Sorcerer. Ooh. Plasma Cannon Shot will hit the Nurgle Predator. Ooh, Nurgle Predator's really low. Bloodletters will teleport in. That's a strange teleport in, though. I guess they're just looking for the victory point, as now Rostam is kind of suffering on the victory points. Sorcerer just standing there taking damage. Really can't afford to do that against the Tech Marine. Now, I did say there are ways in which the Sorcerer can sometimes struggle with anti-vehicle. He's basically relying on the Las Cannon and the Predator. Actually, at this point, he's barely relying on the Predator for anti-vehicle. Whereas Lomors, on the other hand, not having too much trouble dealing with vehicles. He's got a multi-melt on the Dreadnought. He's got the Plasma Devastator. He's got the Stern Guard Veterans, which can switch to Vengeance rounds, but they don't want to deal with Khorne Marines in melee combat. Yeah, we already see they took a ton of damage there, although this Khorne Marine squad was definitely kind of under strength. If they did have a cast of And They Shall Know No Fear, they probably could have turned that around. Nurgle Predator really being used for the purposes of tanking, and there I'm talking more in the general gaming sense of absorbing damage. Khorne Marines, meanwhile, down to 2 of their models, but at this point, the Scouts do not have energy. Devastator Marines will set up, and the Khorne Marines will just have to retreat. And Khorne Marines are also a subject of kind of much contention, where Khorne Marines, they're a very interesting unit, and the truth is that they're actually kind of good. Like, if you just look at their stats and actually just, like, kind of see how they perform when you actually try them out, they're actually kind of good. But there are often a lot of problems with getting them. They kind of overlap with a lot of other units, and I say this, like, in very, very general terms. Heretics, Bloodletters, Raptors, all melee units. Raptors and Bloodletters with similar performance levels to Khorne Marines, give or take. Like, don't start throwing at me, no, like Khorne Marines way better in melee than Raptors. They're similar, like, give or take. But the big thing that can sometimes make Khorne Marines a questionable purpose is that by doing this, by upgrading to Khorne Marines, you've basically converted, in Rostam's case, just about his only ranged unit into a melee unit. So Rostam has very, very low outgoing range damage at the moment. It's almost entirely in this Nurgle Predator. And, you know, it's just range damage, although certainly melee can work, and there's an important balance of melee and ranged in this game. But just the way range damage works, like on most units, range damage is pretty much guaranteed. There is like an accuracy modifier on weapons, so I don't want to get hit with like being wrong if I try to say like the ranged weapons can't miss, because I guess technically they can, but ranged weapons can't really be dodged in the way that like a skill shot can, or like a grenade from a scout can. They can't really be dodged in that sense. If someone is shooting at you with a ranged weapon, effectively, you are taking damage over time until you get away from them or until you make that squad stop in some way. So, Rostam actually with the triple cap. Plasma Devastator. I don't know about that positioning for the Plasma Devastator, as we see not covering the middle victory point or even just getting this Heretic squad that's approaching. This Heretic squad potentially dead. And in fact it is. Now, it is interesting that Rostam is... he's struggling a bit with this Predator to move it forward. Okay, finally Bloodletters will teleport in to do something about those jump squads, and he has 2 Bloodletters. The tank certainly not having too much success pushing forward, and now it's actually just going to be dead. Wow. Where's the las cannon out of Rostam? That's not looking good for Rostam. Now, certainly one of the strengths of the Sorcerer is that he's generally regarded as very, very strong against setup teams, but we don't see the Sigil of the Rift out of him or really any accessory war gear, which are often kind of considered his most cheesy. This is looking like a hard commit to finish off the Dreadnought, and I think it will work. Every single one of these squads does power melee damage, but there's actually just so many of them, and the Dreadnought can't get away, particularly from the Corn Marines. Although the health of this Dreadnought is going down slowly. Okay, well, no, but the Bloodletters are here. They can deal with the Devastator. This is a dead Dreadnought. Like, slowly but surely, it's going to happen. Bloodletters, if anything, did not respond soon enough. Okay, finally they do it, but they didn't respond soon enough to that, and that actually gives the Dreadnought a chance to make it out here alive. It's still really, really close. The repair's coming in. Oh my god. Lomors saves the Dreadnought. Rostam's still going for it. Rostam needs to focus on the victory points, though. No, at this point, this is actually pretty rough, and now he's just giving up models. Hopefully he can convert that into victory points that will give him the game, but he doesn't. Sorcerer by himself, not going to be able to deal with those shotgun scouts. Here is the cap on the contested victory point, but this is going to be some kind of drop pod. Is it going to be a Venerable? No, it's going to be a Tactical Marine Squad, which does make a little bit more sense in that it's giving him map control. So, big mistake by Rostam, unfortunately. Okay, he finally gets the Dreadnought. But the big mistake by him was that he absolutely saw the Devastator setting up, and he didn't deal with it. He kind of just went all in on killing the Dreadnought because he didn't want to divert some of the damage away from the Dreadnought, and that was his big mistake, because it's primarily the Corn Marines who he wants to keep in against the Dreadnought, because aside from they have faster speed than the Bloodletters, they also have weapons, ranged weapons that can do some light damage to it. And yeah, that, I mean, even there, something like the way that he didn't properly deal with that devastating Marine Squad while chasing that Dreadnought could have been part of what actually made this game go in Lomors' favor in the end. All right then, so that is game one. Game one does go in favor of Lomors. Very close game, but this is a best-of-3 series, so we're going to go on to game number 2. All right, game number 2 in our best-of-3 series between Rostam and Lomors is going to be taking place on This Is Quest Heresy. Rostam, this time, going to be switching over to the Plague Champion, Chaos Ranged Hero, can get melee weapons later on, can both heal and repair. His opponent, Lomors, is going to be switching not only hero, but race. He's going to be playing as the Chaos Lord this time, tanky, destructive melee hero who walks through cover and cannot be suppressed. Certainly, this is pretty much just a full-on, like, master skin, just level 60. I wonder if it's even, like, a special elite skin, but obviously that big demon sword. He's kind of got the banner on top made out of, like, human flesh or skin. Maybe not even human, but just something. The flesh of his enemies. So then, both players this time going for focusing more on just capturing the map. Obviously, Rostam, he went for... I'm not actually entirely sure what he went for early on in that last game. But very different matchup here. Chaos Mirror. Now, Chaos Mirror, I'll be honest and say Chaos Mirror is not a match that I expect to go on super long. Rostam going for the double ticks again. Double heretics. I mean, double heretics still a little bit more common in 1v1 than it is in team games. But the Plague Champion is the hero who I expected from the least. Since the Plague Champion, you know, I talked a lot about the Sorcerer having lower outgoing range damage. Out of all the Chaos heroes, the Plague Champion is generally the one who has the highest outgoing range damage because he is himself a ranged unit by default. Though the Chaos Lord can upgrade to the Combi Flamer, and then he can have pretty good range damage. And instead, we're actually going to see Lomors going for the double Chaos Space Marines. So the double Chaos Space Marines, it's Double Chaos Space Marines, it's generally not as common in 1v1. I would expect it, again, more out of the Plague Champion, because the Plague Champion can sustain the Double Chaos Space Marines with the Nurgle Worship. Chaos Lord, I think in this case, the Chaos Lord is probably just looking more to really just try to bully his opponent, really try to bully Rostam. Now, it's not going to quite work out at this moment, but I wonder if he'll go for the wipe. No, that Heretic Squad's not going down. Might see if he can get another model off in this Chaos Space Marine squad. No, he doesn't. I'm a little surprised. But I think part of the idea here is, at least in situations where Lomors can get most of his squads together, the Chaos Lord can draw a lot of aggro. He can get into melee, whether it's getting to melee with the Chaos Space Marines or the Plague Champion, and that can kind of clear the way for his Chaos Space Marines to do a lot of damage in return. Heretics, though, they're going to get into melee, and this is definitely a amount of health that, yeah, those Chaos Space Marines, they just don't want to stick around there. And although the Doom Blast wasn't used, at some point, it will eventually. And there's really no way that Lomors gets his Chaos Space Marines away from the Heretics there. It's really just a matter of you retreat sooner or you retreat later, and it's basically up to him to decide how many models he wants to give. And in that case, he actually got kind of lucky, retreated eventually, and did not lose a single model. Chaos Lord dealing with the Plague Champion there, so the Plague Champion will just retreat. Plague Champion did get the decap on this requisition point, I think. Not actually remembering if it was actually captured in the first place. Victory points really, really even at the moment. Aspiring Champions put on this Heretic squad, and probably what we'll see, yeah, we see one Heretic squad with an Aspiring Champion, one not. Of course, we're also just at the point of the game where it's early. Rostam probably just saving his resources for other things, but obviously in this setup, the Heretic squad that has the Aspiring Champion is the one that's going to be more on the front lines and more in combat, whereas your non-Aspiring Champion Heretic squad is going to be more focused on map control. And in this case, this time, the double Heretics for Rostam definitely has to be more focused on map control compared to last game, since, unlike before, what I said before about how with the Sorcerer there are benefits to having the overlapping worship effects, which we actually in the end didn't even see that much last game. There is not much benefit, or really any benefit at all. Well, I mean, there is actually some benefit, but definitely not as much, which is that the worshipping Heretics can heal each other, but they're also so squishy that it's still not too hard to burn them down, even through the Heretic worship. Chaos Lord, as we can see, he really just has that advantage in terms of how aggressive he can be. He's dictating the pace of this. He will win this duel between the Plague Champion, because he is, in the end, although his melee damage at the start of the game isn't too high, he is a melee unit. He's got the bigger health bar, and he will do more damage in melee than the Plague Champion when the Plague Champion still has a bolter. Chaos Lord, in that case, in the end, only forced off because these Chaos Space Marines came out to support the Plague Champion. However, we just saw that the way that Rostam was kind of pushed back as a result of the the Chaos Lord pushing that far forward. Raptors will now be out for Lomors. Just kidding, for Rostam. And I do like this in some sense, that the Raptors are kind of good into the double Chaos Space Marine build. The double Chaos Space Marine build is meant to be more, the idea behind it is more range damage. It's also kind of tanky, but it's not great in melee. Of course, Chaos Space Marines are actually good in melee for a ranged unit, but that generally still means that since they are still a ranged unit in the end, they still will generally lose to most dedicated melee units who can proc specials against them. But Lomor is kind of taking advantage of that. This is something, the Chaos Lord, he got to Tier 2 first, although Rostam a little bit slow on pressing the Tier 2 button. And then Lomors has the Blood Crusher out. And this is definitely a strategy that is as old as time itself. Fast-teching with the Chaos Lord, with a kind of small Tier 1 army, getting to Tier 2 before your opponent, and then bringing out a Blood Crusher at a time when it is completely uncountered. Oh no, Rostam. Rostam lost the Plague Champion as well. This is looking really bad for Rostam. I mean, it was bad enough that he's behind in tech and the Blood Crusher is out and is completely uncountered, but losing the Plague Champion there just makes it so much worse. Like, it was a bad situation, and now it's falling apart quite a bit. So this is, in my opinion, this is part of the strength of the Chaos Lord. The Chaos Lord, since he is, out of all the Chaos heroes, he's the one who's the melee tank. He's the one who can draw a lot of aggro, be very aggressive, force your opponent off the field. If he's soaking up all the damage, that means his squads aren't, so they aren't bleeding as much, which helps the economy of the Chaos Lord player. And since the Chaos Lord can be that aggressive, he can also... You know what? I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Well, basically, there's just a lot of things about the Chaos Lord that really just help his economy, help him to fast tech, and then bring this Blood Crusher out. It's an age-old strategy. And Rostam has a lot of problems here. You know, aside from the fact that the Blood Crusher was completely uncountered, he needs to make a unit purchase to deal with this Blood Crusher. He did not have any squads that could be upgraded. He got a Havoc in tier... He's getting a tier 2 Havoc to deal with it, which is not uncommon. But it's also a big part of the reason why Havocs can actually be pretty common in tier 1, because if you don't get them, then you won't have something that can be upgraded to deal with vehicles in tier 2. So this is... It's an immediate las cannon purchase. We're not going to see any... we're definitely not going to see any autocannon trickery at this time. The autocannon... It would take some very, very creative micro outplays for an autocannon to work here. It needs to be the las cannon, because there definitely are going to be ways that Lomors is going to be able to deal with this Blood Crusher. Or rather, deal with the las cannon dealing with his Blood Crusher. Although now it might be in trouble, because he doesn't have the support for it. Alright, maybe he doesn't get this Blood Crusher out alive. He doesn't even have the charge. This is a dead Blood Crusher. Okay. Now, of course, that makes me seem really stupid and makes me just seem like I should eat my words, but I'm gonna throw Lomors under the bus here. He did not properly support that Blood Crusher, and although there was a time when he did have, there was definitely a time when he had a lead. He had a lead, and he had a period of time when the Blood Crusher was completely uncountered. And of course, unlike me, he doesn't know exactly when that period of time when the Blood Crusher is uncountered will end, but he needs to just be aware of the possibility that at some point it will end, and he needs to be ready for it. And the Blood Crusher does need to be supported for that purpose. I mean, even just as something as similar, Chaos Lord did go for the Mantle of Hate, and oh yeah, Drain Life is actually something that could be used to support it. Like, if you see that Havoc model, that Havoc that's targeting it, you just use that Drain Life on the lead model, and then suddenly the las cannon isn't doing anything to the Blood Crusher. Even Let the Galaxy Burn could do it. And again, even with only a las cannon to deal with the Blood Crusher, even just something like Khorne Worship to get the Chaos Lord or the Chaos Space Marines quickly into melee with the las cannon would have been able to save the Blood Crusher there. But he pushed the Blood Crusher up with no support whatsoever, and eventually it did die, and it seems like he's kind of content to have it dead, and he's keeping up in map control, even though he's still just got this single Heretic double Chaos Space Marine army, and he's upgraded both of them to Khorne Marines. And at the moment, there's not really a great answer to the Khorne Marines as well. Rostam instead going for the Tzeentch. Now, the Khorne Marines, they can run ahead. They can tank the damage from the Tzeentch Chaos Space Marines in the time that it takes them to get into melee. They're super low on hit points, though. But they do proc a special attack that does kind of help them on retreat. Oh no! Actually, does this get out in retreat? It's being hit by the damage over Time Bolter from the Plague Champion. So, in that case, though, Khorne Marines just went into that. They just did not have enough health going into that. They just didn't. So, other squad of Khorne Marines from Lomors. And those Khorne Marines I talked about before about how they can work out well. But, like, as we see, in this case, Lomors literally has no dedicated range damage. It's a pure melee army. Pure melee army. Literally, his entire range damage is coming out of the plasma and melta-pistols from the Khorne Marines. And of course, they're just going to use those until they get into melee. So, those axes, 30.77 power melee DPS. which is less than Bloodletters, but a big part of the strength of the Corn Marines isn't so much just the weapon itself. There are many other things, as we see. It's listed in the tooltip. They gain melee skill, so they can proc those specials. More health. They also, probably the biggest one in my opinion, is the speed. They get +1 speed, and that's something that makes them particularly lethal because they become very, very good at killing other squads on retreat. So here we do see one of those answers to the Corn Marines. Oh, saw two abilities used at the same time. We saw the, I believe that was the Destructive Strike. Yeah, it was definitely Destructive Strike because the Chaos Lord did not get health back there. But we also saw the Pestilence Strike out of the Plague Fist from the Plague Champion. That's something that will work out very, very well against the Corn Marines if the Plague Champion can reliably get into melee with them. Because it's certainly a big part of what Lomors should do with his Corn Marines at this time, given that they are, again, given how fast I said that they are, is try to just stay away from the Plague Champion. And he can use his Heretic squads to help out with that. Heretics suppress the Plague Champion, while the Corn Marines just take advantage of... Oh no, the Heretics might not be able to do that if they're dead. Alright, I think they'll just barely get out of here alive, but that was cutting it close. Yeah, Corn Marines should... In many cases, the Corn Marines should be able to just run past the Plague Champion, especially if the Heretics are there to just use that area of effect suppression on him. Of course, you know, that kind of goes both ways. Rostam can use his own Heretics to suppress the Corn Marines from Lomors, and then that'll allow the Plague Champion to get into melee with them. And this time they're not even... They kind of just ran into him. Of course, they were looking for the Chaos Space Marines, but it was actually a kind of a tough situation for Lomors, because if he ran away from the Plague Champion, he'll kill the Plague Champion there. So unfortunately, we're still seeing some of the strengths of the Corn Marines there. So... of course, Pestilence Strike was used, and that stunned the Corn Marines. But then, once Pestilence Strike once the stun wears off, the Plague Champion, even as tanky as he is, he's going to be ripped apart by the Corn Marines. I don't know if maybe he was hoping for a special attack, but Corn Marines often just seem to have the edge in terms of special attacks as well. Raptors deciding not even to take that fight, not even with an aspiring champion, and I don't blame them. Pretty sure Corn Marines have the edge in that as well. Corn Marines, yeah. They're also level 3, so chances are they probably have better melee skill than the level 2 Raptors. Raptors, there's not much the Raptors in this case. This is actually interesting, where earlier on I said the Raptors were good into the double Chaos Space Marines as long as they were ranged Chaos Space Marines. But Raptors into double Corn Marines is not very good at all. Now, for now, this is eventually going in favor of the Corn Marines. He's trying to get the Tzeentch Marines in there to support, but this is... that was just straight up not a fight he should have taken. And jumping in didn't help either. I mean, jumping in causes suppression. If it was ASM knockback, maybe there's a case for jumping in. And not only that, but that meant that since he used the jump, he didn't have energy to jump out once the fight was clearly not going in his favor. And that's clearly just dead Raptors in the end. Terminators out on the field from Lomors. You know, at this point, I think this is... I think we're very close to game here. Dreadnought is coming out on the field for Rostam. He's going to make it a Khorne Dreadnought. Khorne Dreadnought, okay. I mean, Khorne Dreadnought, certainly head-to-head, going to do very, very well against just about everything Lomors has. But I don't know if it'll be enough. We might also see an autocannon put on the Terminators. The map has been painted red. Rostam also, well, he's lost some generators, but he has plenty of power in the bank. It's actually requisition that he's struggling with a little bit more at this time. Low requisition income. Predator coming out on the field for Lomors. Yeah, and I think once that Predator comes out on the field, I think Rostam will be kind of crippled. With only the las cannon, I just don't think that'll be enough. Because there will be so much pressure from Lomors. Like, Lomors could possibly... I think there are actually many ways in which Lomors could win the fight even without the Predator being there, but like the Predator being there, it makes the Lascannon Havoc necessary to try to deal with it. But then the Khorne Marines will just swarm forward, will just choose their targets. Lascannon Havoc barely has any health, it only has 2 models. Full retreat from Lomors is incredibly premature. I mean, I guess it's just like seeing the Chaos Dreadnought, not wanting to take any damage, but with how fast the Khorne Marines are, they absolutely could have just ran away from the Dreadnought. Teleporting in, though, from the... So that time, we had a premature retreat. This is, in my opinion, kind of a risky teleport forward. He's trying to commit to killing the Dreadnought. Okay, you know what? As long as he has the Lascannon support, it's not so bad. If he didn't have the Lascannon Predator support... Okay, alright. This is actually now a big win for Lomors. It's a dead Dreadnought, and with the dead Dreadnought, that's probably just game in his favor as well. Lomors' favor, that is. Chaos Lord dies, but I don't think Lomors cares. Dead Dreadnought pretty much means he wins, and yeah, Rostam calls the GG, knowing indeed that that is also the end of the game. So, in the end, it is Lomors taking it 2-0. Again, best-of-3 series means a maximum of 3 games, but it's the first person who wins 2. So, Lomors does take it 2-0, and it's actually Rostam who did submit this replay, so thank you to Rostam. I will be trying to get a few more replay submissions in before the next round of Faction Wars come around. Hope you enjoyed it, and have a good night.